In today's video, I would like to share part of my exam in aviation technology subject that is part of my Aviation Management Master Studies that I do. With this video, I would like to empower all my cabin crew colleagues to know that they are all eligible and that they are all part of a great platform that makes them eligible to broaden their knowledge just the way I do at this moment, if they wish to change departments within the aviation industry, which is actually my ultimate goal with the studies. Our team did an air crash investigation project on a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX, and let's start. So we're going to be talking about the unairworthiness, which is important when we look into this air crash project that we made. There was an improper record keeping and the pilot reporting that could have been identifying problems with the Flight 610 on the MAX MCAS system, despite the fact that the pilots were not being trained or briefed on the functionality of the MCAS system. The captain's primary flight display erroneously showed speed and altimeter flags. That led to the replacement of the aircraft angle of attack sensors with the one repaired by extra airspace that had the 21 degrees bias, which was actually undetected by the Lion Air maintenance team. The next flight on the PKLQP, that's the aircraft registration, would take it from Manado to Jakarta, where the flight crew have experienced activation of the MCAS system and left control column stick shaker to be shaking during the flight, as Michael have mentioned. Some flight displayed warning messages were showing disagreements between the airspeed and the altitude readings. The flight crew were able to stop the activation of the MCAS system by switching the MAX stabilizer trim to cut out, according to the report. The flight crew have reported malfunctions to the maintenance team once they have landed, but they did not report the activation of the stick shaker and how they were able to actually move the stab trim to the cutout. JT610 flight crew have experienced the very same MCAS problems as the previous flight crew. However, they did not identify the runway stabilizer, according to the investigators. The aircraft logbook have recorded 6 problems that have been identified with this aircraft 2 days prior to the accident happening, which was including errors with the airspeed and the altitude information displaced. The plane angle of attack sensors that measures the angle between the wings and the flows of the air had encountered problems, and it has been replaced just the day before the crash has happened. In the most recent flight before the crash, pilots were issuing something called pan call, which is an urgency signal that is a level below Mayday. The crew have said that the aircraft has been operating in abnormal conditions due to an instrument failure on that flight, and they have managed to land the airplane safely after requesting an uninterrupted descent, of course, and the problem has been logged. In the previous flight before the crash, as Michael mentioned, the stick shaker, which is the warning device that alerts the pilots when the plane is at risk of stalling, had been activated throughout the flight. And now we're going to look at the details of what happened exactly on board the aircraft, since we talk about an event like that. So JT610 took off from Jakarta at 23:20 GMT time on the 28th of October. Both the pilot and the co-pilot were experienced. The captain had 6,000 of flying hours, while the first officer was quite close, 5,100 hours. Just a minute later, the co-pilot have asked the air traffic controller for confirmation of the plane's altitude on their radar display, and then the pilot have flagged up that there is a flight control problem. At 23:20, the plane's automatic anti-stalling system pushes the plane nose down for 10 seconds. The flight crew corrects this manually by pointing up the plane nose up, and then at 23:25, the anti-stalling system pushes again the nose of the airplane down, and again the crew is able to correct this. 4 minutes later, the air traffic controller notices that the flight appears to be descending, and the co-pilot says that they have a flight control problem and they're flying the plane manually at that point of time. At 23:30, the crew contacts the airport arrival controller, who tells them to prepare to land back on the runway 25 left. Just a minute later, the crew says that they cannot determine the altitude of the airplane because all the aircraft instruments are indicating different altitudes. They're asking the arrival controller to block an airspace around 3,000 feet above and below, so they will be able to avoid traffic around. This has been approved. Just a minute later, airplane loses contact and the wreckage has been identified 370 miles from the last recorded aircraft position, and the damage to the aircraft suggests that there was a high energy impact. Now we're going to talk about how technology works. Now we're going to talk about the angle of attack. There are 3 dynamic concepts that we're looking at. It's the angle of attack, the trim, and the stalled flight. The angle of attack is the angle between the aircraft wind chart and the relative wind. The figure that we see below shows the relative wind, which is represented by the black arrows in the horizontal plane and the cross section of an aircraft wing. The chart on the cross section is the imaginary line that connects the leading edge of the wing and the trailing edge. Boeing 737 MAX has 2 angle of attack sensors, one of each side of the nose of the aircraft. The angle of attack is actually influencing how much lift wind of an aircraft is producing when it is increasing. Then the lift wind that is produced is also increasing, but it is increasing up to a point. When the angle of attack gets too high, the aircraft stalls, which means it produces a lot less lift and it in turn begins to descend, and that is sometimes uncorrectable. If an aircraft in its trim, the aircraft is in trim, it means that the aerodynamic forces of the aircraft are in equilibrium, and this is important to the stability and the maneuvering of the aircraft. Boeing 737 MAX is equipped with an electric trim tab stabilizer that automatically adjusts the horizontal stabilizer of the aircraft, which is the horizontal portion of the tail, in order to maintain that trimmed state. However, this electric trim tab can be disabled by the pilots, which requires the pilot to actually manually trim the aircraft using something called a trim wheel that is in the cockpit. Now, findings from the Lion Air aircraft that has crashed say that there is a relationship between the MCAS, the aircraft angle of attack sensors, and the pitot that Michael have explained to us. Now, the erroneous sensor activation of the MCAS has not been the only case for this fatal crash. It's a combination of the pilot's inability to correct the nose down pitching moment. When it comes to our conclusion, we would like to say that Ethiopia's aircraft, which crashed near Addis Ababa on the 10th of March, only 5 months after JT610 happened, was the same year, and similar losses were there. And the total would be that 737 MAX was able to kill 346 people. Boeing has lost $636 million in 2019 due to aircraft being grounded. This aircraft type being grounded. It is the company's first full year of loss since 1997. Boeing charged with the 737 MAX fraud conspiracy and agreed to pay over $2.5 billion. 2 years after it was banned from flying, Boeing 737 MAX is now safe to return into service in many parts of the world, and it in fact ends the 22-month flight ban for this jet. EASA has ungrounded the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. The agency issued an airworthiness directive on January 27th this year. And at the end of our presentation are our references. We would like to thank you everyone for your attention, and we do hope that you have enjoyed our project. Thank you. Now comes the time when our professor starts asking questions. The correct answer to the same is very important in forming the grade for this subject. I'm very thankful to be part of Qatar Airways cabin crew team for 10 years and learn a lot of things, and in between, here is the answer that I have learned thanks to the trainings in Qatar Airways.
Thank you very much. Very interesting subject and a good example. things can go very wrong. Do you know what the Swiss cheese model is? And could you explain here what is the Swiss cheese model in context to the 737 MAX?
Yes, we in fact mentioned that yesterday on our class, and this is what I said exactly. As from my point of view, I really enjoyed studying and learning about this project. And the first thing that came into my mind when we were looking at the cause was the Swiss cheese model. This is part of the crew resource management that we used to learn and be trained about. And it's basically when one error starts, it's like the Swiss cheese. When we have it, it has a lot of holes. So when one error starts from somewhere, it leads through all other holes before it becomes a disaster. Maybe not the precise definition of it, but I fully understand it, is in a way that in this crash, this is what exactly have happened. When we look into the report and we see that there were 89 findings, or we're looking at 6 major errors that were there, everyone who has been part of the aviation would say that it's been the Swiss cheese model, because even if one thing was fixed, let's say pilot would have the training, yet in those circumstances we are forgetting about the maybe maintenance. But because when Indonesian flight crash happened, everyone was subscribing it to the bad safety record of the airline. And nobody, I mean, I'm not saying this like nobody, but the aviation experts were not immediately concerned about the technology and that there might be a problem there when it comes to manufacturing. But when 5 months later, Lion Air, Ethiopian happened, and Ethiopian is an airline which has a better safety record, then things began to, be more serious, I believe. And then the connections between the two crashes. And this is exactly what happened. The Swiss cheese effect led to this crash. It's very popular in aviation. And when we read about aircraft investigations and crashes that have happened, usually in aviation, unfortunately, it's like that. Thank you very much for viewing this video. Like, comment and share it, and don't forget to subscribe on my channel. Thank you.